When I was pregnant with our first child, that these deep, deep ties of enmeshment and codependency started to rip. And I think that that's not altogether too uncommon, because at the time, and remember when I first got pregnant and everything like that, this was where my diseases really began to escalate too. And I think the fact that this kind of coincides with where the relationship with my mom went is not, I don't think that that's coincidental.
Mm-hmm.
So specifically, obviously remember this, it was Thanksgiving, and we all met up in Colorado at my brother's house, and I was 7 months pregnant, I think at this time. And I had been high risk and supposed to be on bed rest and all of this stuff for this entire time. Now, something interesting about, listen, when you study through narcissism and everything like that, yes, you could easily check every box of my mom being a narcissist.
Which at some point we'll talk about.
Right.
Narcissism.
Our view of narcissism.
It's very different than the
it's a little bit of a different view. Again, I just think it was a coping mechanism, like an extreme coping mechanism for her. So there was never very much like when we'd pick up the phone to call, it was usually me calling her and then I would spend the majority of the time just being filled on her life. So she rarely, if ever, asked about my life in general. And then, again, that was kind of normal. That was just my norm. I didn't know
you were the parent
to expect anything different. Yeah, I had that role. And so when I became pregnant and then had all this high risk stuff, and this was one of the first times I had traveled since the whole pregnancy. And so we're in Colorado. My brother has a infant at this point, 1 month old, maybe. Let's see.
Yeah. If you were
a month.
Yeah, 6, 7 months old. Yeah.
And so we're all staying in his house. My mom's there. And she uses a ton and gets very, very out of her mind with drugs, to the point where she goes up the stairs and takes my brother's infant son out of the crib and takes him down the stairs and wakes him up in the middle of the night, takes him down and is messing with him, not in an inappropriate way, but and is like playing with him at like 3:00 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
You were there, I believe. Well, maybe you hadn't gotten there yet when this had happened. And so obviously my brother and my sister-in-law were just like, what the heck? And like, this is not okay. And then the denial starts and the passive aggressiveness starts, and her husband was there at the time as well. And at that point, something came a bit unglued for me, where it was almost like a decision that happened that I wasn't consciously aware of like, this is not going to happen to this next generation. Like in my mind, I almost thought like it was okay that it happened to us, but it is not okay for it to happen to these kids. You know, here I'm carrying and I'm seeing this little infant, and I'm just like, this is going to happen all over again. And something just cracked. And I really went after her and was like, this is not okay. And, this is not going to happen. And her husband, actually, who was not a particularly physical confrontation type at all, pushed me up against a wall and cornered me. And basically, here I am, 7 months pregnant, whatever, and was yelling at me that I was the reason my mom used. I was the reason for her addiction. She's always good until I come around, and then she does these kind of things, and it's my fault. It's because of me. And that was, again, there was just this moment where I would have probably taken that before and internalized that, but it made sense. I was like, okay, I get that she does that. And so this is one of those things, like, if that's the case, then I need to pull up out of her life. And it was this very big confrontational thing. My brother went after the stepfather, he wasn't really a stepdad, he was just her third husband. And so all of these various things, it just crashed. And there was that first initial like
cutting of ties.
Of where the enmeshment, that codependency started to crack. And I thought, like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to allow this to happen.
Because now it wasn't just about protecting her anymore.
Yeah.
Now it was about protecting this unborn child.
So I still wasn't at a place where it could be enough about me.
Okay.
I still wasn't worthy and valuable, and I still carried a lot of these old beliefs and all of these things. But what I was willing to stand up for was my child. And that was the first like whisperings of estrangement. Now, again, I didn't have that word. I didn't have that, but I cut off communication with her at that point. Now, this was that cutting of ties, that angry, punishing kind of
driver
decision.
Was more judgment and punishment rather than
how dare they this, I was so mad. And so that these first initial frameworks of boundaries, not what I consider healthy boundaries, but protective boundaries, came from these particular incidents. This wasn't a one-time thing. This is really a lifetime of situations that culminated in this decision. So that was the first time. So my mom did not meet my first child, until she was, I think, 4 months old.
Maybe 3 months, or
somewhere around there. And it was her and my aunt came out to California, where we were living at the time, to visit, and was still very strained. We hadn't spoken up until that point. And it was very strained. And I could tell she very much felt like she was being wronged in this whole equation. But the fact of the matter is, she didn't really have a lot of interest in my child. She was still, or maybe to the best of her ability, she did. This was really still about her survival, which was all she really had. And so that went relatively okay. And then it started like a little bit of talking here and there again. And so from that point until, how many years has it been now? 6 years, maybe 5 years. I don't even remember, since I've actually had any contact with her.
Oh, well, I mean, are you going to talk about then there was like quote unquote normal communication-ish for maybe, 4 years?
Reserved. Yeah, definitely. Listen, once that enmeshed codependent rip began, it became further and further and further apart over time. That's when I started to realize, like, she has no interest in my children. Like, she doesn't ever ask about them. There was never like birthday cards or calls or anything like that. No attempts to visit, stuff like that. It was very much on kind of her terms and what would happen with her. And then when we would have times together, my mom's an amazing person. I mean, she is so much fun, and, or at least, she is ravaged by her disease, her addiction right now. She's, from what I hear, ravaged by it. Like a shell of any former self. But what was there before, it was just so much spunk and so many wonderful things.
Adventure and crazy fun.
Yes. And so there was this, whenever we would be together, there would be these moments of fantastic connection and love and, and all of these things. But then there would always be something would happen. And I think what I realized over time was there was a lot of truth in what her third husband had said about how much worse she would get when I would come around.
Mm-hmm.
And when I stopped taking that as blame or shame, or, I stopped filtering that through guilt, I started to get more curious about that and think, now listen, I was not the cause of her addiction. She was addicted far before she even had me. There's the story that she was 9 months pregnant, riding horseback, smoking a joint when she went into labor. Whether that is true or not, I have no idea, but that's the story. And so lots of stuff happened before I was even in the picture. And then her addiction just, had various forms and escalations. So I knew I was not the cause of that. I had done enough work, by the time I had already been doing, some of this work and some of this stuff when the estrangement happened, like officially. But there were moments. So this is the crazy thing. She did some of this work, watching me get well. And through me getting well, so much of me getting well was dealing with my childhood and dealing with her. So much, like
within yourself.
99% of it went into dealing with the beliefs that I had made and all of these different things surrounding her. Now, that's not to blame her. That's not to say she was 99% responsible for what was going on in me. It was the beliefs that happened that I created with the situation. And so through that, as I uncovered and peeled back all of those layers and I healed and literally went into not just theoretically like, oh, let me reframe this and think about it better. When I changed the neural pathways in my mind and I did the work energetically, spiritually, somatically, subconsciously, there was so much good.
Mm-hmm.
So much good. And I started to reconnect with her in my mind, right? And on this, what I consider to be this other plane, this other dimension, that where I do believe that she exists without all of her pain and all of her trauma, where she can be the mother that she wanted to be. I really do believe she wanted to be a great mother and to give all the things that she would have wanted to give had she had them herself. And when I started doing that, I was just like, oh my goodness, something really profound happened to me where I started to see my responsibility. That's where I started to realize oh my goodness, I was really mean. I said a lot of terrible things to her. And at this point I have kids and I thought, oh my gosh, if my kids ever say half the things to me that I said to my mother, what would I do? That would be crushing. Now, not dumping judgment or blame on me as a child, because I knew I was doing the best that I could at the time. I have a lot of compassion, a lot of love for who I was growing up. But also putting myself in her shoes, I thought, wow, how hard must that have been to, without invalidating or diminishing me, but being able to I was held so strongly by myself that I was able to step into her shoes and just be like, whoa, I was very moved. So this was around 2013 or 14.
13, I think.
13. That I was like, I just want to reach out. So we had been estranged for a while, maybe a year or two.
Yeah, there was on and off for for about 4 years.
This was one of the more
there was on and off.
significant time periods where I actually reached out to her and I was like, listen, I'm not asking for anything more. I'm not looking for you to say anything, respond in any way. I need to let you know that I see my role in this. I see how I'm responsible for this and this and this. And I just want to apologize for my role in this. And here are the ways. And I explained, a lot of the ways that I saw that I had contributed and things that I had said. And I was just like, I just want you to know that I know this. I'm aware of this. This isn't all on you. And so that opened a little bit of a door where she started to communicate with me. And the thing was, though, is through the communications, and this was the standard that I had put out when I had kids, is I won't see you. Don't call me. Don't talk to me. Do not talk to my children. There's no contact if you're using. So that was the boundary, right? The boundary line that I laid. If you're using, don't call, don't come, anything like that. Because when she would use, she would say things and do things that were very, very hurtful and just awful. And so that was kind of the rule. And as long as she stayed within the rule of that, then we could have communication. Looking back, I feel like I see how that was very controlling. That was very one-sided, in some ways. Healthy to the degree in which I could hold that at the time. That's all that I had to offer at the time.
It was a healthier ultimatum than you made at 11, right?
Right. Yeah, because I hadn't really talked her through sort of where I was with all of this stuff, but that was kind of the hard, fast rule. Okay. So then she reached out and we started talking a little bit more here and there. And then she was interested in getting help. And so I was like, okay, I think this can help. We've done a lot of work with addiction. And so she did some of the work and she legit, I was just shocked, and partially why I got into this stuff, because listen, if it can work with addiction, then I felt like it could work with anything, right? So she got off of alcohol. Like, she was just, you could almost see an aversion to alcohol. And this was over a little bit of time, but like a month or so. And she wasn't drinking anymore. And I saw this like layer fall off of her. And there was this period of time, and I remember it really distinctly because she called me once. And the first thing she did was like, hey, how are those girls doing? And I nearly fell off my chair. And I thought for a second, like, who's she talking about? Who are we gossiping about here, those girls? And then I was like, I think she's talking about my kids. I think she's asking about my kids. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're fine. And I got to talk them up a little bit or say the things that I think probably normal people get to say about their kids. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is going to work. This is crazy. This is wonderful. And it was. And we went back for Christmas and had this like idyllic Christmas.
So much fun.
So much fun. And my girls still talk about that Christmas. My brother was there with his boys. And she was like baked banana bread and did the whole things. And I was like, oh my gosh, my mom's back. Like, this is my mom. And I have her.
Taking me out hunting.
Yeah, like we did that. We went hunting. We did all sorts of stuff, right?
Long before our current lifestyle.
Right. So it was just such a beautiful time. And I thought, this is what you get. Like, I had done so much of the work and I had held her in that space where I was like, yeah, okay. And I did. And the rest of the story is just like, if that's the way she was going to show up, let's do this thing. And so that lasted for like a couple years, I think.
About a year.
Year, maybe. And then things started to, she didn't keep up with the work, right? She didn't keep doing the stuff that she needed to do to heal the magnitude of, or multitude, I should say, of trauma that she was.
It wasn't the going back with alcohol, but it was having never fully cleared some of the other addictions, right? That's really what it was.
Right. So then it was the pills. It was the prescription pills. It was and then even, I think, other drugs, like illegal, kind of things. And then the addiction started up again. And so I remember a particular conversation that we had. And this time, again, I was so much more in my right, healthy mind. And I remember being able to talk her through this and saying, listen, I just being able to express how much I loved her, how much I held her in this way, how much I appreciated who she was, all that she had done for me, and who I wanted her to be for my girls, and all of this different stuff. And then I said, but this is the way that I believe that in your best self you can show up in this relationship. And for you to honor you. And this is because her father, my grandfather, again, died from alcoholism. And I remember I adored him when I was little, right? All my grandparents. My dad's father was very scary and could be very mean. Probably loved him in some way. I mean, I did, of course, but he was very scary. But this grandfather in particular was he was drunk probably most of the time. But there were times when you could just get into the drunk where he was very kind and funny and, goofy in that way. So I remember I really adored him. But as I got older into my teenage years and I started to see what kind of like how he was with his kids, the things he would say, the things he would do, I built up a real intolerance for him and also a lot of judgment around him. And I was like, I never want my kids to feel that way about their grandmother.
So it went from this idea of, hey, I'm putting this quote unquote boundary, this wall, or I'm cutting ties if the ultimatum, to, hey, I want you to be adored.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't anymore, don't do this to my kids. It became, I want this to be your legacy.
I really felt, and I know this is going to sound weird and hard for some people to believe maybe, but I wanted to honor her. I felt like I had witnessed her in her higher self. And the majority of the time I engaged with her, I was doing it in the work that I was doing through my mind, spending time with her in these healed places and being able to go to her in a place that I found that she was healed in her higher self.
Well, and when you knocked down a lot of the trauma and changed a lot of the neural pathways from your past, good things started coming up, like remembrances and real memories that you had forgotten about that were really good things that you were able to now enjoy.
Yeah, so this was the real her that I had been able to glimpse. Now, when I was holding on to that survival stuff, you don't get to see that stuff.
Right.
So I was holding on to all the trauma because I was still trying to survive it. When I let all of that go, then I was able to experience her and see all these good things in her. So this final time came from a place of like, I know who you can be, and I know who I want to remember you as, and who I want my kids to know you as. And out of love and out of the way that I see you, then this is going to be the boundary is, when you use, you're not yourself. And so if you choose to be not you, then I'm not going to engage with the not you. But whenever you're you, like I'm here and we're ready. And because the not you does things that I feel like don't honor you. And that's not what I want to hold. And I think that you're more than that, right? Now, even though that felt really real and very congruent, she was not able to receive it that way. And I get that. I understand that because so much of her lenses and so much of her filters have been guilt and shame from who knows how long, probably birth and probably ancestral, so when you filter that information through guilt, shame, and blame, then what you hear is, and what I'm guessing she heard was, only unless you're performing in this way will you be able to be in my life, like very conditional, very everything like this. And yes, so to some degree it is. But I think that that's part of human life. That's part of, you you don't get to sit next to me if you're going to be throwing things at me or punching me in the face. Like, you get to sit here when we both are in an agreement that we're going to hold each other with respect and treat each other in a way that honors both of us.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be, doesn't mean that it's got to be perfection. There may be moments of conflict, but that we're going to engage and work that out, honestly. And so I was able to talk through all of that with her, but, and at the time I talked to her, it was actually good. What she went away with that and did, not good. The way I think it got filtered. And so then after that discussion.
Well, because if you're still feeling stuff about yourself, even if you can have a good, if what you're doing in your mind most of the time, because you haven't worked out all this stuff and found your own worth and found your own honor and all of these things, then even if it's a healthy conversation, what you do with those conversations later is inevitably filter it through the only lens that we have. So if it's some sort of a self-deprecating lens, then even the good stuff is going to come in such a way.
Right. And sort of that last straw there was hearing her talk about the grandchildren in a way that she had talked about my brother and I, like, sort of behind our back. And that was like, nope, never, ever, ever want my kids to hear through the grapevine, through any other way, that this was said about them from their grandmother's mouth, So that's where I realized, like, okay, no, not only is the addiction problematic, but also a lot of the life, family dynamics.
Oh, and then like watching the kids and what would happen and things like that.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's a whole other story where she had watched our.
Well, that was the culminating like moment of, okay, I'm going to hold to my boundaries. I'm going to hold to protecting myself and the kids without I'm so scared of you, but in a loving manner of, everything you're talking about.
Yeah. Right. So this is why people do this. This is, some of the secondary gains of those fearful boundaries is we think if we don't hold those really strong, fearful, angry boundaries, that we'll do something silly like let my mother watch our children. That was before I had gotten into these healthy places, right? So that was one of those kind of, well, maybe she's doing better, so let's still stuck in that kind of enmeshment place. And then so she came to watch our kids, and oh heavens to Betsy, that was very, very, very bad what ended up happening there. But then time, went on, and I grew more and did more work and, figured stuff out. And then so that final conversation was able to happen. We were in Maui at the time, and I remember that very, strongly. So we had the conversation, and then I started getting text messages, and this is what happens it's unfortunate, but I think to cope with the way she perceived what I was saying, she went on a, like a binge using and stuff. And when she uses, she gets very nasty. And so I got this like landslide of text messages where I was like, oh yeah, no, this doesn't honor her for this to be my mother saying these things to a daughter. And so then I blocked her, and first I sent her a message and said what was going to happen. And then I blocked her. And then, and that's been 5 or 6 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
5,
maybe 7. I don't know.
7.
I don't remember.
I don't remember either. I don't say that callously. It's become something. For me, it was no contact for quite a long time. Then there was, my oldest daughter was, very much wanting to connect. And so I did say, and listen, the way that my kids know about this is as they've gotten older, they know that my mother has struggles with addiction. And, but I've not vilified her. I don't think in any way. The stories I get to tell them about her are all the good memories that I've had. But any communication had to be monitored. And then, so I monitored that. And, I think that it's been fine. It's lessened and lessened and lessened. I don't think there's been any communication for quite a while. I did over time, it was just quick, like happy birthday, happy Mother's Day, Merry Christmas. There was a point in time where she asked if she could send money. And at first I said no, because I just know how that stuff goes. And then she said, no, I really want to send some money. And I said, well, that's fine. You can send it. It's going to be for the kids. And so sent the money. But as that stuff happens, is the story that gets told, to other various family members and everything like this is not true. The story then becomes sending thousands of dollars a month for all these different months, which is just not true. So that's the other thing that's very, very difficult is through my estrangement with her, it sort of led a little bit to not a planned estrangement by any means, but just a distancing from that side of the family as well. And not purposeful. It's just I think naturally happened. We don't live anywhere close to them. Lives are very different. And so as she would talk to these other various family members, then I would hear stories from them. And then I had to just be like, I can't hear this stuff anymore because so much of it's just not true. And then I had to be okay with like them thinking all of these things about me that were not true. So that's been another layer of this, of them. Even my own dad, they've been divorced since I was 4. He had a major issue with me being estranged from her. And more from the, like, it's your mom. You have to talk to your mom. And that is a pretty ingrained cultural idea. And I think that that's probably what has led to, listen, estrangement is not new, even though it's way more popular these days. But it was from the other way around. Like, how many stories do we hear of parents being like, I'm disowning you.
Sure.
Because you're a Republican or Democrat, or because you got pregnant, or because
your gender identity or your gender or your sexuality preference or whatever it is,
or
right?
because you didn't go to school to be a doctor, or because you married that person. So it's actually like, we want to make it like it's this, talking from the perspective of people who maybe are a little bit older, who've been on the other side of the estrangement. I think it's very easy for them to be like, oh, this newfangled thing, everyone's doing it. It's trendy, and just they're just mad, and so they didn't get the way they wanted, and they didn't like what happened to them. And from their perspective, they're like, listen, your childhood was 10,000 times better than mine. What are you complaining about? And I think that's a little bit what people are pushing back against, is the invalidation.
Well, and granted, there is a lot of this talk, right? And this understanding and almost like this permission to just cut ties. And I would say a good portion of the time, it is done out of that driver of, you hurt me, boom, I'm cutting this off. You did this to me. This happened in my life. In one sense, I deserve to cut you out. It's more of a punishment.
Sure.
Really. It's a punitive reaction rather than a compassionate, loving honoring of this person, not wanting them to be able to step into that alternate negative dimensional person that they are, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
it's
that's
the basis
huge.
for cancel culture.
Yeah.
I don't like what you're doing. I don't like what you're saying. You're making me feel bad. So I'm gonna cancel you, and I'm gonna make other people, feel like you're not
validate
you're not,
my
yeah.
own. Yeah.
But some of the underpinnings of this are this invalidation, where, granted, a lot of our parents had very rough childhoods, and they're thinking they gave us better, which in their mind they did. But listen, unhealed trauma carries a signature, and it gets passed down unless it is healed and dealt with.
So even if you maybe have a better house or a better schooling, or a better whatever, the trauma, the problems, the issues that have been there from generations still get passed down.
Yeah, well, I didn't smack you across the face, but like I got smacked across the face, I didn't smack you. At least I didn't smack you across the face. At least I didn't, this. And yet, yeah, but you're not present, and your child is still crying out for attention. And, there's all these various things. But we don't want to get into like just blaming the parents, because again, like the way I see my mom is she really was doing the best she could. That still wasn't enough for me. So it can be
so then what's the difference then? I think this is important, because we've kind of come to the place where you're talking about, okay, all this stuff happened, up and down, work on yourself more. You've worked through things with mom. There was this healing for a little bit, and then, some other stuff happened. And now there is what you might call estrangement, right? This word that you can't figure out exactly what to say. But what is the difference between healthy estrangement? You can use the example of your mom or otherwise, versus the cutting ties like we're talking about.
Or the canceling.
Yeah, canceling.
Yeah, I would think or just like, oh, you're toxic. I can't be around you anymore. I think that, listen, everyone's situation is so unique. So I think people want a checklist of like, how do I know when to estrange a parent or a family member or, whatever. And it is never going to be a checklist. It's never going to be cut and dry. I think always, 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 if you want a healthy option, deal with your stuff. Deal with your stuff first, because that is one of the only ways to start to see clearly. Of like for me, it took me figuring out that I had worth and value and honor and that I was loved to be able to work out of that place, to give love. Mm-hmm. You can't give love if you don't feel worthy or valuable of love. You can try, but a lot of the times it comes back empty, and then it's just try, right? And so, or do instead of be. And so for me, it took all of that. It took healthy conversations with myself. It took me processing, all of these different things, taking my personal responsibility within my own life to be able to see a little bit more clearly what was happening in this situation.
But okay, so you're talking about how something that's really important when you're in these relationships that aren't functioning optimally, however you want to look at that, crazy or, just a little. You're talking about a healthy estrangement or a healthy, and working on ourselves. That's what's first, right? Work within what's going on and what are we holding that we need to let go of, all of that. So then isn't working on yourself enough? I mean, can't you just work on yourself enough so that the relationship can be back where it needs to be?
Well, sure, if you're the only one that's in any sort of conflict, right? Like,
but
if you're the only one,
relationship,
it's just not. Relationships are two ways, and you can't change anybody. So that's where we get to decide. Like, I'm going to filter all of my stuff. Why? Let's say you and I have we have an issue, and
well, let's not just say that. Let's talk a little bit about this.
Okay, right, sure.
In one sense, the almost estrangements, the almost cutting ties, almost the different things that have gone on in our dynamic. I think this is helpful.
Okay, sure. Like, why would there be even talk of a separation or of a divorce or anything like that?
Which I'll just tell the audience, which was always coming from her side first, and me filtering it very much. I mean, even just like what your mom saw, what you were talking about with your mom, like filtering it through my own self-shame, guilt, fear, abandonment, going away from these conversations, like, okay, I understand, but then doing a lot of stuff in my head, feeling things about me. So all of that.
Right. Yeah. So I think the difference is the ultimatums of like, if it's the punishment thing, right? Or the ultimatum of, if you don't do X, Y, or Z, I'm going to leave you. Mm-hmm. Okay. Rather than unpacking and dealing with all the different things that were going on with me, how we got here, how I contributed to. So what would happen is that I'd recognize a dynamic that was unhealthy, right, between us.
Sure.
And then I would be like, okay, what's my part in this? and unpack all of that and figure all of that out. And then realize like, okay, it's the dynamic that can't go on. This is an unhealthy dynamic. It hurts both of us. And so the dynamic needs to change. You're free to do that or not do that. That's the thing. But understanding, like, it took me a while to get there. You need to be able to, understand the dynamic and then see if you want to continue in that dynamic or not.
Now, would I be right in saying that the more self-work you do, the more, in one sense, room and space there is for me or that other person, rather than just like, okay, I've come to the decision, change right now or else, kind of, that's right. There's a difference.
Yes. Yeah, because then it's sort of, it's like once I go through the process of seeing how we got here, then I understand, oh, you must have gone through a process to get there too. You're not just doing a bad thing to me. And this thing is, it's the thing that's the problem. It's not the person that's the problem. And that just like I have the decision how I was doing this program, contributing to this program for possibly years, and I had to decide to stop contributing to the problem, that you also have that agency and freedom to do so. Free will to do that as well.
To let go of the enmeshment, to let go of the filtering, to let go of the dynamics.
Yes. And it's just a whole different conversation. Then if you decide to continue the dynamic that we've both agreed is unhealthy, right? Then that's your choice. And that's like, okay, I'm honoring your choice. And in honoring your choice, we're not together. So it's more of an honoring rather than it's coming out of anger and frustration and ultimatums and, but it does take work on oneself. Now, that being said, for someone who's in if we're talking about a survival kind of thing, if you're being physically abused, sexually abused, emotionally abused, right? Yeah, you need to get out of that situation. At least you need to give yourself some space. And once you have that space, now your work starts. How did you get there? Not blame, not shame, not like fault, right? Because that's not going to help anybody. But this like, okay, how am I here? And being able to kind of get there and uncover. Then you get to decide and make a decision and many, many people who were abusive physically, mentally, have been able to understand, take a step back, work on themselves, figure out how they got there, and then make the decision, I'm not going to keep doing this.
Well, and when we take that space to work on ourselves in our situation, regardless of what's happening, we actually step into a different role. And then there's a different space in the dynamic of the relationship. Now, again, it's still two-way street, but it almost forces that person to dance differently. They can still dance in a way that is not helpful, but it is pushing them to be different. And so when we work on ourselves in any relationship, it will enhance the relationship. Just like you did, it enhanced your relationship with your mom. Now, ultimately, it's still, I would say, culminated to this healthy estrangement, holding her with honor, holding her with love, wanting her to stay in that place of love and honor you hold for her, right? But it did change things. And in our relationship, you working on you allowed me to then, I was forced to, like, in one sense, face myself, but not out of ultimatum, out of, this isn't who I am. What is going on here? Right. And then being able to work on me. And it's a continual process.
And listen, sometimes the results look the same from the outside. Sometimes people estrange. And sometimes people divorce, and sometimes friendships break up. And it can look the same on the outside, like, well, the result's the same. But let me tell you, it is not internally the same. If you do it from a place of that it's coming from worth, value, honor, that you've done the work, you've healed the things,
right?
Then so the result might look the same, but how you come out of it, so different.
Well, and how you engage their in with other relationships. It's not going to be the repeat, right?
Yes. So it isn't like, my mom and this, and and evil, I don't know, whatever you would
Or
say.
even a spouse, and then you end up in the same kind of relationship and another kind of relationship that's the same.
Mm-hmm. Well, because I did that in my first few years of kind of like clunky estrangement, or what I would say canceling for a while with my mom. I then shifted into like seeking relationships, like trying to get mothering in adult female relationships, and I crash and burn left and right, picking. I would repeat the same thing of like, oh my gosh, they're choosing someone else over me. Even though I'm trying so hard and doing all these things and providing all these things, they're still going to choose this other thing or person. So I did that with friendships and relationships for a good while. I did some really kind of interesting things.
It was more enmeshment, more codependency. It was just repeat of
I was just
things.
repeating my relationship with my mom, but with other adult female relationships. And so, gosh, once I finally healed that stuff, I was able to like sort of take responsibility and be like, oh, yeah, you can't be my mother. Like, you're somebody else's mother, you're not going to be my mother. But an interesting thing that happened there when I finally healed all of that stuff, I did actually get a lot more maternal. Like, people did love me in this sort of maternal way.
Because you weren't seeking it in some sort of a weird, misfiring way anymore. It wasn't this needy you have to be. It was what was the overflow of when people see you for who you really are. Of course they want to do that.
Right. It's the lack thing. Because if I'm holding lack, oh, I need this, then I'm the energy, and the signals that are going out are lack. And then I find other people doing lack. When I let go of that and there's abundance, then the people who are abundantly maternal and abundantly like, I have love enough for everybody.
You find them.
They came in and I got very loved up on once I healed that stuff and let that stuff go.
Okay, let me ask you a question that for me, especially in our dynamic, and I'm sure this can relate to you and your mom or anybody else out there, but the thing that before I did the work on me, before I continuously do the work on me, whenever there's a victim mindset of like someone's trying to abandon me, cut me out, somebody's doing this, that other end, you're the person, if you're listening to this or watching this, maybe you're the person on the end like me with Heather, oh no, what's going to happen? Or with a friend or with a parent or with a child or whatever. And it's this whole idea of, yeah, but I understand all of the honoring and maybe this idea of healthy estrangement, but what about forgiveness? I mean, come on. What about this idea of you've got to forgive? If you're cutting me off, if you're, having this estranged relationship with me, I know you're doing it to quote unquote honor me or honor yourself or whatever, but what about forgiving? Come on, I can change. We can change all of that.
Yeah. Listen, forgiveness is super powerful. It's super powerful. There's science and research out there about the power of forgiveness. The thing is that under the guise of forgiveness, we have also done a lot of allowing ill treatment in the name of forgiveness. So you can forgive and still say, no, I totally forgive you. I love you. I honor you. I hold you in this place. And I'm not going to allow this to continue. That's okay. It doesn't mean you didn't forget. Then there's the whole like, well, I'll forgive, but I'll never forget. And I think that there's, those, when the wounds are healed, the way that they're really, really healed, if they're healed neurobiologically, if they're healed in your heart and they're healed in your soul, your gut, then you keep the wisdom and then you let go of the hurt. So the wisdom is like where you used to allow yourself in this, particular dynamic to be belittled or hurt or disrespected or whatever. Now that can't happen. I'm too valuable. It's not a fight. Like, no, I'm too valuable. It's just, it's this treasured sort of idea. And then we realize that their behavior isn't them. It's a behavior. And so we get to love them, but not love the behavior. And you get to separate that out. Now, if they want to become their behavior and they want to still do it, and that you don't get them unless you also get the behavior, that's their choice. And so I still love them and honor them and respect them. I still honor the person, but not the behavior, right? So I can say, like, hey, for instance, like, I love my mother. She's a wonderful human being in her, like, I can't talk about her without smiling because of how much I engage with her in this other healed plane, right?
I know personally all these stories you've been sharing and all this stuff, you're very dissociated from them, not in a coping mechanism dissociation, but that's more the story, almost like a movie that's not real versus your own life.
Yeah, it doesn't really feel real to me.
It doesn't
anymore.
resonate with you.
Yeah, no, because I just don't. I don't feel like that's my makeup. That's like things that happened in that. It's like the Matrix, right? You got plugged into this particular program, and that program sucks. Like, bleh. But that's not who you really are, and that's not who they really are, right? So you get to kind of understand that. So it isn't like bypassing, it's honoring them, but respecting them enough that if they want to choose that behavior, like, I fully get that my mom's addiction is a coping mechanism, and I've almost watched it happen when she did the work to kick the alcohol, of like the amount of trauma she is going to have to overcome. And all the guilt and all the shame and all the stuff like that she's
things to work through.
Gonna have to work through. To her, it's too big. So she uses to numb out and forget about that. And I respect that. I do. I honor that for her. I get that for her. It's not the choice I wanted to make. And I think that I still hold out that hope that and not a false hope like I used to, like someday she'll be the mother that I hope she has those moments of clarity of who she really is. And listen, I feel like me living my best life, continuing to try, me, trying to cycle break with my kids, and even the mistakes I make with them helps me have more compassion on her. That even holding her in that space is like another energy pulling at her of her highest self, saying like, you can do something different out there, that she isn't her addiction, that she isn't a disease, she isn't a trauma, she isn't a lost cause. So, but I can't change her. I can't make that happen for her. She's got free will. She's got a choice that she can do, and it's too big for her
right now.
At least she perceives it that way. And that's the other thing is, so if you're on the other side of this, if you're a parent or even a child, although I think it's more frequently that it happens that a child estranges, or has an estrangement, cuts off the adult. If you're an adult parent and you're like, my kid cut me out for no good reason, there's a good reason. There is a good reason. It may not feel good to you, but to them, it's their truth. And that's another thing I realized through all this is my mom's version of truth is different than my version of truth. And it used to drive me crazy to no end. And I thought I held on to so much. If we circle back to forgiveness, I would have said I forgave her. But I was still waiting for her to apologize. And it was conditional forgiveness. And I wanted nothing more. I thought that what would heal me is hearing her admit all the things. Admit that even though she had said before it was sort of she was a bad mother or whatever, I never really wanted to hear that. I never wanted to hear her say she was a bad mother. I wanted her to validate some of the experiences, right? The abuse or whatever, or to say, I'm sorry I chose this or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then until I did a lot of the healing. And then I realized, like, I already had that. I already knew that. And I didn't need to hear her say it. Now, the funny thing happened was once I healed all of that stuff in that kind of year time frame where she was herself, she did say it. I got the apology, and I found myself being like, no, you did the best you could. And I see all the ways that I was like defending her in that way. So, even back to this whole thing about forgiveness, the thing I needed to do was forgive myself.
Yes. That's actually exactly what's going on in my mind, even in our dynamic or anything else. I'm looking for the person on the other end, the person being estranged is like, just forgive me. But really, we need to forgive ourselves. And once we do, it's always open for reconnection.
Yeah. And I can honestly say, listen, there was stuff I needed to go back and forgive myself for. Not because I did anything wrong, but I needed the forgiveness. I needed the forgiveness of myself for like believing that I was unlovable and for believing that she was choosing these things over me as if she had, agency at her disposal and was just making this choice. I had to forgive me for recreating these things and holding on to these things. And, I had a lot of forgiveness. Now, people that you just let her off the hook. First of all, I don't really feel like I need to stick anyone on any hook. That's just not where I operate from anymore. Does she have responsibility? Yes. Yes, she does. But that's not contingent on my being okay or not, whether she's willing to take that responsibility. And so I think that that's the important thing too, is I do forgive, but first and foremost, I forgive myself.
So we talk a lot of Mind Change on how we can only give what we hold within, right? In a lot of ways, what I'm hearing through all of this is not just that we can only give what we hold within, but we can only receive what we already hold within. So affirmation, validation, praise, love, acceptance. We have to have all of those things for ourselves first. Otherwise, it's just going to bounce off, or it's going to be filtered in a weird way.
Yeah.
So forgiveness.
Yeah. And I had to actually go back. I remember I was looking for validation from her, right? I had to validate me. Like, oh my gosh, that poor little girl. Like that poor sweet little girl. Like I had to go back and be like, you did need your mommy. You did need that. You deserved it. You absolutely deserved it. You deserved complete and total attention, adoration, choosing. You were easy to love. You tried so hard. Like I had to go back and actually validate all of that stuff. It was true.
Not just consciously,
right?
But on the deep subconscious programs that you had held on to for 30 something years at that point.
Yes. And I mean, some people, their first step is hearing it validated maybe through a therapist or something like that. Like, people look for validation. You actually can't skip that. Mm-hmm. But I was able to skip getting it from a therapist and give it to myself, which is really the ultimate goal. And realize like, oh my gosh, now when I gave myself that validation and that forgiveness, that's what finally allowed me to step in and be like, if this was me, this was probably her. Like she probably was doing the best she could. And we say that a lot, like they were doing the best they could with what they had at the time. And I still needed more and deserved more and should have had more. She could only give what she had. So it's sad and it was a bummer, but it doesn't happen anymore. Like I can go back and I can change those things. That little girl is not still out there waiting for her mommy. Like she's not. There's no place. There's no dimension realm where that exists any longer. She's got her. She's together. She's good, And so I did that work. And I feel like that's the truest true and the highest high. Like had she not come in with her trauma and it hadn't been passed down and generational and all of these things, how could you have not loved me? Like I was so cute. You don't have to be cute to be loved. But like I tried so hard. Like I was a great kid. And, I know with my kids, like, you just love them. You love them so hard. It hurts. And so that would have naturally happened had there not been all of these things that were given to her when she was a little girl that she carried and didn't know how to let go of. Like, people they're not taught how to let go of this stuff.
Oh, and even when we go back and we look at videos or pictures in our kids before we did a lot of our own healing and things, we look at them when they're little and it reminds us of like, oh my goodness, ways that maybe we didn't give them what they needed.
Yeah.
And because of the work, instead of it coming from a place of guilt and shame and oh my goodness, it's like, oh my goodness, yeah, we should have had them come into bed with us more. We should have had them, they did deserve that, right? It's that whole idea of what they deserve without the guilt and the blame.
So now, because I was doing the same thing to our kids younger, where they would be like, no. And I'm like, you have no idea what I went through when I was, I was doing the same, perpetuating the same story. Where when I healed a lot of stuff and worked through, and listen, I have teenagers. This is a work in progress. We're still doing this every day. But, they've been able to express things. Spanking. I just put it on out there. Be all nice and vulnerable. We spanked our kids when they were little. And, we can talk about all the reasons why we made that decision. I would not do that same thing now. Various reasons. Now, they've been able to come and talk to us about that and the way they framed that and what they thought. Now, this has given me so much insight into my, I'm like, that's not true. The way that they perceive it, their story around it. I'm like, that's not true. That didn't happen. Now, I didn't say that out loud because I've done the work. But I know how tricky memory is. And I know how that what's happening, if they're expanding upon that and making it bigger than what I perceived it to be, that means it's important to them. There's a resolution that needs to happen. That's what matters most.
Right. Not whose memory is right or why it was done or anything like that. But okay, what do we do now?
That's true to them.
Yeah.
And so I had the blessed opportunity to sit down and be like, yeah, you're right. That sucks. That was hard. We shouldn't have done that. We should not have done that. And you're right. And that was not okay. And I get to share like, you know what? If I knew then what I know now, this is what I would have rather have done. And this is what I would have rather have, and how do you feel about that? And we get to talk about that. Well, with my kids, yes, that's great. I'm so grateful that you know better than what I knew at the time.
Yeah, never take away their stuffed animals. That's awesome. Things that mistakes we made. Yes, you let them crawl into bed with you anytime, just different things.
Yeah, we just, we didn't know then.
Yeah.
We really, and we can even say without it being defensive, I really believed this at the time.
Yeah. Oh, totally. That this was the best, whatever we did was the best way.
But then in the same breath, I can say, I don't believe that anymore.
Oh, absolutely.
I was wrong. And how many 50, 60, 70-year-olds that we still work with that are still waiting for that, for their parent to say, I'm so sorry, I was wrong. Parents who are long dead, they're still waiting for that, which we get to have that now. But why do we have that? It's because we've gone and done, we've done the work. We've done tons of mind change work, tons of sessions, tons of self work, lots of deep diving. Obviously, we've been doing this for many years. And now we have a community of people who we get to do this with and learn from. But that's giving us the opportunity to go back and make different choices now than our parents could have made, or that, I could have made had I still been holding on to all of this.
Wow. So much there. I'm sure we could just keep talking for hours, but
yeah.
Thank you.
Speaking again, though, to those people who maybe are on the side of estrangement is, the work is still in you first. And, I've worked with clients that their child has been estranged from them, and they do all this work and they figure out all this stuff, and they're just bursting at the seams with oh my gosh, I know now what I didn't know then. And they feel so connected to their kid, and yet the kid's still in the state of estrangement, But to some degree, the parent's okay with that because they understand.
Well, and on top of that, how many of those clients have we worked with? They get to a place and it's weeks, months, years, but something is shifting inside that other person that, lo and behold, when that person does the work for themselves, it opens the door, and all of a sudden this estranged person, or this person that put them on the end of estrangement, all of a sudden opens up and reaches out.
Yes, to the point where we've worked with now families.
Oh, totally.
Where there were estrangements, and then someone does the work, and then it leads to a bridge that then the parent does the work, and then
more bridges.
Sisters and brothers do the work, and it's like, yeah, we've so many times that's happened that we can say it's a pretty regular phenomenon.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, and thank all of you for joining us once again on the Mind Change podcast. We really appreciate you and would ask if you would please like, subscribe, download, do all those things that help us to grow the podcast so that we can continue to create the kind of content that resonates with you. If you're interested in learning more, going deeper, we have book clubs happening all over the country. And you can find out more about that on our website, mindchange.com, I think, /book clubs. And you can gather up with friends or people from another place and read the book together and go through the steps on kind of deep diving into some of the stuff that we were talking about today on your own and working on that for yourself. So thanks again for joining us as we endeavor to change the world one mind at a time.